The more that I go through the early episodes of ReZero, the more that I realize just how faithful of an adaptation it really was. What I mean is that we're about to be 7 episodes deep, yet barely anything of substantial notice has been cut from the anime. As we go through these next couple of episodes, you won't find too much in terms of actual cutscenes, but instead finer details that help to develop the world and characters better. So let's continue our ReZero cut content series and take a look at what exactly we missed out on from episodes 5 and 6. But very quickly before we get started, since we're getting closer to season 2 of the anime, I figured that now would be a good time to shout out Bookwalker. As I've mentioned before, Bookwalker is where I get all my English translated digital light novels and manga, which in turn allows me to make this type of content. So if you want to get a head start on ReZero Season 2, then Bookwalker is the best place to do just that. We've actually been partnered together for some time now. So if you're new to Bookwalker and want to give ReZero or any of the other isekai that I cover a read, then go ahead and use the link in the description plus code AniNews to get $5 off your first ebook purchase today. Alright. Episode 5. The morning of our promise is still distant. If you recall from the end of episode 4, the night before Subaru died for the first time in the mansion, there was an encounter that wasn't in the anime. After visiting Beatrice before bed, Subaru found that Rem was still busy working late into the night. It was practically midnight, yet here Rem was still doing some housework. Subaru began to wonder where Rem's other half was. At the very least, she should be keeping her sister company while she continued to work so hard. But that's when Subaru learned that this is around the time that Ram serves Roswaal tea. It was a rather absurd thing to do at this late hour, but Subaru decided to think nothing of it. Rem, on the other hand, looked to be somewhat bothered. She seemed to show a slight bit of discomfort with the current topic of discussion. Unlike in the previous days though, this discomfort didn't stem from being around Subaru. In fact, both Ram and Rem were actually beginning to become rather fond of him as a person. Even when Roswaal had asked if Subaru was a spy, not only did Ram say that the probability was low, but she even spoke of Subaru in a positive light, something that was very rare for Ram to do for anyone. Even now, during this conversation with Rem, she had become accustomed enough to Subaru's presence to not show discontent when they confirmed their own date. It wasn't something as special as the one he planned with Amelia, but it was still something that Rem seemed to want to do. Unfortunately though, Subaru wouldn't be able to make either, as he would awake the next morning to find that he'd been reset back to 4 days earlier. He awoke to 2 very harsh looks of disdain, and it was these very looks that hurt him more than anything else. He couldn't stand to see the emotionless eyes of these sisters he just worked so hard to befriend. The fact that the relationships he built were now completely erased brought such an overwhelming feeling of grief that he couldn't help but hide his head in shame. He didn't want these people who now only saw him as a stranger to see him cry. It took a little while for him to gain his composure back, but after raising his head and seeing those emotionless eyes once more, he just couldn't be in the same room as them anymore. It was too much pain for him to handle right now. That's why he decided to run. Now, everything after this up to the point where he resolves to retrace his last path is generally the same. When we get to the bath scene, it's here that we get another lesson on how magic functions. In this world, most tools and appliances run on mana. If you look at the hot tub, this was heated via a fire-attuned magic crystal placed underneath. Once someone enters the bath, their mana causes the crystal to activate, which in turn starts to heat the water. It functions in a very similar way to that of the kettle. You see, having certain magic crystals become exposed to mana results in them activating some sort of effect. In these cases, it was heat, but for other tools it could be different. All in all, this was generally how most things functioned, as Lagunica was a society built with magic crystals at its core. It was a concept that proved to be a bit confusing to Subaru. To him, a society like this seemed only advantageous to those who could use magic. It didn't seem very fair at all. That's when Roswaal tells him that magic is actually something that everyone can use. It's just that one's ability to use magic is centered around the size of their gate. This is a doorway through the body that every life form possesses. It's what allows mana to take on a form that has an effect on reality. What that form is dependent upon the caster's affinity. As we learned from Puck in episode 9, magic is divided into 4 basic elements. Typically, an average person would possess an affinity for one, but Roswaal, being the genius magician he is, possesses an affinity for all of them. Subaru, on the other hand, had an affinity for dark magic. Lucky for him, there was a specialist in the mansion who could teach him how to master those types of spells. Unfortunately though, that person was Beatrice, so the likelihood of that ever happening was very low. After this we had a whole bunch of scenes with Rem and Ram, a lot of which were taken from various points of the novel but didn't exclude much at all. So now we can skip to all the way after Subaru came back from the village. During his study session with Amelia, there was a brief moment of hesitation that came from her as she flipped through the picture book. She had come across the story of the witch, a topic that she very clearly wanted to avoid. So she quickly closed the book and instead began to talk to Subaru about his work habits. Apparently, Ram had been able to spot that Subaru was holding back on the job. He just didn't look to be working nearly as hard as he did when he was studying. Something about him showed that he was trying to hold himself back, and that just came off as laziness. In actuality though, this was an intentional lack of effort on his part. Subaru wanted things to go exactly how it did the first time, even if it meant having to feign uselessness at his job. Of course, doing the same tasks over and over will inevitably result in him getting better, which is why he had to put in less effort. Little did he know that doing that would produce different results all on their own. And now that Amelia was directly confronting him about it, it's not like he could keep doing the same thing anyway. So Subaru pledged to put in his best efforts from this day forward. In exchange, Amelia would have to go on the date with him. That was the deal that Subaru came up with. So all that was left now was to just make it to the 5th day. As Subaru anxiously waited overnight for that time to come, he spent his time thinking about how this loop was different from the last. As they were now, things actually seemed better with Rem and Ram, but he still wasn't able to figure out the cause of death, so that was a bit of a pressing issue. He also didn't get to see Beatrice as much either. Although she wasn't always friendly towards him, Subaru found the normalcy of their conversations to be rather calming. He felt like she was someone he could express his thoughts to without any worry. In a way, she was probably the only person that Subaru could act normal around. I mean, Subaru was always trying to impress the others, but Beatrice was someone who just didn't seem to care no matter what. So that probably made Subaru feel more relaxed around her. Anyway, all those thoughts soon disappeared as he slowly succumbed to his curse. The only difference here was the overwhelming thoughts of how much Subaru wanted to die in this situation. Having his guts spilled all over the floor caused such excruciating pain that he could no longer care for anything other than to die. Leading us now into episode 6, The Sound of Chains. As usual, the first place Subaru would go to upon returning was Beatrice's library. The relaxing atmosphere of the room and Beatrice's presence served to help him gather his thoughts a little bit better. Unlike in the anime, the talk about the curse actually took place here as well. It was really just meant to be one lengthy scene with Beatrice where Subaru was gathering as much information as he could. Then, after getting kicked out into the garden, Amelia being there in that moment wasn't just a chance encounter. Even though she was trying to play it off as such, she was actually intentionally waiting for Subaru to appear so that she could personally thank him. She didn't want to outright say that this was what she was doing, but the fact that she kept lengthening her conversation with the lesser spirits, and even extended Puck's grooming session, made it very obvious. Now, because of all the mysteries surrounding his previous deaths, this loop in particular is one of the few where Subaru actually decides to willingly give up. He wasn't going to bother with fostering relationships or setting up the date because right now, breaking out of the loop was the only thing that mattered. Although he didn't like giving up from the start, he was okay with sacrificing himself once more if it meant finally figuring everything out. So 2 days passed as Subaru stayed as a guest and continued his investigations and studying. When it came time for him to tell the tale of the crying red demon to Ram, something about his interpretation of it seemed to have an impact on her. One that was similar to the time when Subaru was talking about demons with Rem. You see, rather than siding with Ram's rather extreme opinion of putting all the blame on the helpless red demon, he instead felt that it was best to sympathize with both. It was an answer of indifference because he felt that neither the blue nor red demon were bad. Their only mistake was not talking to each other when they were close. That was the root cause of why they ended up straying apart from each other. Just as he did with Rem, Subaru made it clear that he was actually rather fond of demons. He would much rather befriend both than have to chase them away. It was an ideology that caught Ram by surprise. She ended up quickly switching the subject to the tales in the picture book. Subaru's interest with the tale of the dragon gave us a good overview of Lagunica's history as well as the implications of the current situation. A very long time ago, the royal family made a pact with this dragon. We don't know what the royal family promised in exchange, but for centuries since the pact was made, the dragon has been lending its power to Lagunica. Whether it be famine, plague, or war, whenever Lagunica was in a crisis, the dragon would always appear to help out. The kingdom had been saved by it numerous times already, but with the royal family now gone, no one knows what this dragon was promised in return, or if it'll even come back to claim it. Whatever it was though, it was something that would have to be resolved by the future ruler of Lagunica. If Amelia was to fill that spot, the responsibility of this promise would fall entirely on her shoulders. It was pretty much tantamount to having the fate of the entire kingdom in her hands. The dragon could easily wipe them out just as easily as it protected them. What it chooses to do next, though, lies solely with the winner of the royal selection. Although Subaru empathized heavily with Amelia's burden, this was something that Ram simply couldn't. She was under the impression that every person was born with a specific role to fulfill. If Amelia's was to eventually take on the dragon by herself, then there was nothing that anyone could do to help her with it. It was a completely logical answer, yet still one that Subaru refused to accept. Deep down though, he knew that as he was now, there was nothing that he could do about it. He just had to sit there and accept that that was the case. Anyway, Subaru's final day at the mansion finally came. He left in the morning and had 16 hours to kill until the estimated time of attack. Up until now, Subaru was convinced that someone related to the royal succession was out to eliminate Amelia. He assumed that his second death was just the result of being collateral damage. What didn't make sense though was the fact that someone like Roswaal would allow his mansion's defenses to be breached twice. I mean, he was trying to implement such a crucial plan. So why was it that Subaru died twice while inside what should be a safe place? There was the chance that Roswaal's defense plan may not account for keeping Subaru safe, but there was no telling what else the intruder could be capable of. That's why any bit of information was going to be helpful here. No matter what, Subaru needed to find out why he was dying. Now, even though this loop was intended to be a sacrifice, Subaru still couldn't help but feel that he made new bonds with Amelia and the others. This just went to hurt him more when he thought about how it would all be forgotten again. Don't get me wrong though, he doesn't want to die himself, but he also doesn't want to let anyone else die. In the end though, it was something he had to accept as his punishment for choosing this plan. So, as the evening went on, Subaru would find himself to be attacked by the same person from the previous loop. The fact that it was Rem made Subaru feel pain greater than that of any of his previous deaths. He couldn't stand the thought of knowing that his days in the mansion meant absolutely nothing to her. Despite the past few days, there wasn't a single indication that Rem trusted the person in front of her. And that's what hurt Subaru the most. This left Subaru with only two options. He could try to get to the manor and speak directly to Roswaal, or try and get to Amelia and have her convince them that he was trustworthy. Amelia was the only beacon of hope that Subaru had left. But having just been betrayed by someone that he thought he trusted, it brought forth a feeling of doubt he thought never to be possible. What if everyone had the same mindset of Rem? What if Amelia would just disregard him in pursuit of her own personal goals? He couldn't help but think that perhaps Amelia may just end up abandoning him as well. This one interaction with Rem had completely changed his overall perspective on the entire situation. That's when he came to a realization. If he couldn't even trust the person that he was devoting his life to protect, then what was the point of even doing everything in the first place? It was at this point that Subaru no longer had a plan. He was simply running through the forest without any reason at all. After getting incapacitated by Rem's wind magic, Rem repeated a ruthless cycle of healing and torture. Subaru would end up losing his consciousness numerous times, only to have himself be brought back with Rem's healing magic and experience the same form of torture all over again. It went on for much longer than what the anime showed, and the little remorse that Rem put on the entire time only went to worsen Subaru's mental state. In the end, his torture finally came to a close when Ram completely removed his throat, bringing us to the end of the third loop and the beginning of episode 7. So that's pretty much it for today's cut content. As you could tell, the only stuff missing from the anime was a few things that further developed each of the characters. It's stuff that may help in adding a bit more depth to the story, but definitely isn't necessary to include in the anime. Anyway, With big ReZero news coming out soon, I expect us to have a proper announcement for the upcoming Season 2 release date. And once we know when that's coming out, I'll slowly start to ramp back into the ReZero content. But as I said in the beginning, if you want to get a head start on your own, then go ahead and use Bookwalker to start reading the ReZero novels or manga today. It's honestly a great way to support both the industry and my channel. And if you're new to Bookwalker, then you can use code AniNews to get $5 off your first digital purchase. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So until next time, ciao!